All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the OVS VAP Training Center webinar, Managing Performance Remotely. I'm Blake Cush, the Director of Training and Outreach at OVS. We said this many times before, we understand your programs are under some unique forms of stress right now, and today's webinar is actually the 8th in our Resilience webinar series, which was developed with the goal of helping you tackle some of these pressing issues. So a full list of those trainings offered in the webinar series, the Resilience webinar series, will come up on your screen here shortly. There they are. And they're also available on our website at ovs.ny.gov/training. There you can actually click on any of those links and access the recordings from the webinars that occurred earlier in April and in May. Today's webinar will also be recorded, and that will be published on that training page either later today or early tomorrow, and also made available on our OVS training YouTube channel. I'd like to take the time to also remind you that we're offering free increased access to our consultants from the OVS Training and Technical Assistance Request Program, or TARP, through individual and small group coaching sessions. Our consultants are also today's webinar presenters, and they'll speak a little more about this today. You can learn more and access all of these free resources on that same training page. I encourage you to definitely check back on there. It's updated pretty routinely. As soon as you exit today's webinar, you'll be directed to an evaluation survey on the presentation. Take a couple minutes, give us your feedback. You also have an opportunity there to notify us if you're interested in receiving more training and follow up on a variety of other training topics. And it looks like with our participant account today, we're going to be at over 2,000 people that have been trained through this Resilience webinar training series. We're not fishing just for positive feedback, but we really do appreciate anything you give us in those evaluation surveys, because it helps us improve from week to week and from training to training. So please take a couple minutes. You get automatically redirected, and it should take you no more than 5 minutes to complete the survey. So today's webinar will be led again by Jennifer Amstutz of JA Strategies and Alan Krieger of Krieger Solutions. Both Jenny and Alan have more than 40 years of combined experience in consulting and training, working with nonprofits and agencies around the state of New York. And both have served as executive directors in nonprofit organizations and have master's degrees in management. With that said, I'd like to formally welcome Jenny and Alan. Kick us off.
Thank you, Blake.
Thanks, Blake. Good morning, everybody. Just to follow up on the coaching for a minute, we've had coaching sessions with a number of leaders at all levels in the organization, and we'd encourage everybody who's interested to give us a call or email us to find out more about it. A lot of people don't seem to understand what coaching is, and it's basically an opportunity for you to talk with somebody outside your agency about issues, concerns you have. We're good listeners, but we also have a lot of experience and a lot of suggestions that we can offer. So I want to encourage you to take us up on that if you're feeling especially challenged in this time. I'm going to turn off my video, and we're going to get started with the program. So by now, most of you are pretty skilled with WebEx tools, but I just want to quickly walk through. If you move your cursor at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a few of those icons in the center. There's one with like a bubble in it. It'll be gray if your chat box is off. It'll be blue if your chat box is on. So please turn on your chat box. And if you look over to the right, you'll see a to box at the bottom, and change it to all panelists. This way, whatever you say, one of us will see it. We're not all monitoring it at the same time. So send it to all panelists, and we'll make sure to respond to your questions. So type in questions, comments. We'll be asking you for feedback at certain points, and please use the chat box for that purpose. We'll take time at the end of the presentation to answer all questions we didn't get to during the presentation, so type them in as they come up. Okay, let's take a look at our goals for today's program. In order to help you manage performance remotely, we're going to show you how to develop and deliver clear performance expectations to your staff. This will make it easier for you to objectively assess their performance and give them useful feedback. If you can do that, you're holding people accountable. In addition, we'd like to help you do this in a motivational way and not in a micromanaging or dictatorial way. When you put all that together, you should be well on your way to successfully managing your staff's performance. Before we get into our presentation, we have 2 poll questions to help us better understand who's on the line with us today and what you're most interested in hearing about. The first question simply ask how long you've been a supervisor, not just in your current job, but in your career. Make a quick estimate. You don't have to be exact. The second question, ask what's most challenging for you in terms of managing performance remotely. Please choose your top two choices, your single top choice. If you can't choose only one, then you can choose two. And then you can add in the chat box any challenges that you have that we haven't listed here. So the poll should open up. It's on the right. You've got a minute and a half, so please quickly go through and answer both questions.
We get a lot of questions, just so everyone's aware, about access to today's PowerPoint slides. They are in the chat box. The link has been made available to you, and they can also be found on the OVS webpage, ovs.ny.gov/training. So they are available to you right now.
And when you do answer your two questions, be sure you hit submit in the lower right corner so that your answer is recorded. You've got about 45 seconds left. And again, feel free to put in the chat box anything additional that's not on our list of challenges that you're finding it challenging right now. Got about 10 seconds left. Be sure to hit submit. We'll be closing the poll in just a few more seconds. Okay, the poll's closed and the answers should pop up on your screen, also on the right.
About 10 more seconds it takes.
Has to compile all your input and then it pops up.
Here we go.
Okay, so there are your answers. So of the folks that answered, we have mostly people in the 1 to 3 and 3 to 10 years. We've got some not yet a supervisor and quite a few that are brand new to supervision. And we've got a few that have extensive experience, more than 10 years. So that's great. We have a nice mix on the call. And in terms of what's most challenging, being fair about expectations. Oops. Giving staffs different living situations. So that's an especially big challenge right now. Some people are home with children who they're homeschooling, very distracting during the day. Others have an environment with limited technology capacity. Might be more than one person working from home needing to use the same computer or bandwidth. So that how do you fairly assign that? And that is a big challenge. We've been talking about that in our coaching, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about expectations today and adjusting expectations to remote work. And that's, again, we're going to spend most of the session today really talking about what expectations are, how to craft them, and then how to use them to give feedback. It's really no different than how you would do it remotely or not remotely. The difference is your expectations have changed or are changing because of the remote situation. So we'll be giving you the tools for crafting the expectation, and then be happy to take questions if people aren't clear how to make those changes. Okay, and then Jenny, anything in the comment box that people have?
Not too much. I think that the comments that are in there really mirror what we saw in the poll, that people are worried about being fair about expectations, and then the fact that for some people this is a new dealing with people working remotely is new for certain supervisors, that it wasn't something that they had in place before. So, and then for the people themselves, being able to set clear boundaries between what's work and balancing that work and family time, so that they know, when people have time, making sure people have time, free time available for family interactions. So nothing that we haven't necessarily, that aren't in the answers themselves, except for maybe the idea that some of this is new for people, and really trying to find the balance for both their staff and for themselves is an issue. All right. Okay, so we will keep these answers in mind, and hopefully, as Alan said, once we have a better sense of how we can clearly set performance expectations and have them in place, it makes everything a little bit easier. So we're going to go ahead and start. And I want to talk a little bit about what actually is accountability. And we use the term a lot, but we may not really have a clear definition in our mind about what accountability is. And for me, accountability means someone is responsible for meeting measurable performance expectations. And the key is the word measurable. And we're going to spend some time in a few minutes talking about what that means to have measurable performance expectations. And the other thing we wanted to start thinking about is, why are we actually talking about accountability now? With everything else that we have to think about, why would we want to add this additional task of holding staff accountable to the things that we already have on our plate? And holding others accountable is always a challenge for supervisors, not just now. Setting expectations and giving feedback is not always a place of comfort for people. And because of the current crisis, it's become even harder. Now we're no longer sitting in the same office. We don't see what people are doing on a day-to-day basis. And the day-to-day expectations of a position and the tasks that are part of the job description might be very different now than they were a couple of months ago. Jobs have changed, and they probably will continue to change as this thing develops. The people that work with us and for us have a lot more going on in what is their day-to-day work environment. They may be stressed by health crises, by additional family members in their home. They may be balancing homeschooling with work, with taking care of sick family members. And that makes it harder for you as a supervisor to set expectations. It also makes it hard to hold people accountable to those expectations. The clients that we're working with and serving also have additional stressors and needs that they may not have had before, and they may be presenting with different issues than they would have a couple of months ago. And that adds stress to the staff that serve them. And so when you combine all of these things, it may add up to low morale and staff that are already unmotivated. And that makes it especially hard for us to want to have conversations with staff about performance and about accountability. But with all that said, setting expectations and holding people accountable is important at any time. And so it shouldn't be something we just set aside now because of everything else that's going on. Holding people accountable is about having the right tools. And the most important of these are clear and precise performance expectations. These provide both the supervisor and the staff member with the map they need to achieve their outcomes effectively. And in addition, techniques for giving constructive feedback and solving problems are also important. And in this remote environment, you also need to establish systems and processes for monitoring the work that's being done. To be effective, performance expectations have to be SMART. And if you've taken a training with me or with Alan in the past couple of years, there's a really good chance that you've already heard us talk about SMART. But if you haven't been so lucky, let me walk you through it for performance expectations. SMART stands for performance expectations that are specific and clear. They have to be measurable, otherwise you won't know if you got there. They need to be something both parties can agree upon, and they need to be realistic if they're going to be achievable. And finally, they need to have some kind of time frame. Even if you've already set performance expectations for your staff members, they may need to shift a little bit during this remote work period. It might be a good time to re-examine the expectations that you have and make some changes. But before you do make any changes to performance expectations of your staff, you might want to check in with your human resources department or with your own supervisor to make sure those changes line up with your agency's policies. So let's first look at specific and measurable. Those are the most challenging and the most important when we're talking about accountability. The key is that we want our performance expectations to be behavioral. Behavior is something we can observe and measure, and performance is a behavior. We want to hold people accountable for doing what they're supposed to do and for doing it well. While it might be helpful for a staff member to have a certain level of skills and knowledge for them to be successful in their positions, skills and knowledge are not performance. So we're going to cross those off. You can see those crossed off on the slide. We want our expectations instead to be action-oriented, based on the actions and behaviors of the staff member. So how do we make behavior specific and measurable? It's easy to measure some of the tasks and work that your staff may be doing. You can count how many clients they've contacted or how many hours of service they've provided. You can measure the number of outreach calls that someone has made, or even how many claims have been processed. But our performance expectations are often encompass things that are not as easy to measure. We may want to look at how independently someone works or how they might take initiatives to solve problems on their own. We might want to measure how they interact with their team members. Are they cooperative and supportive? Do they come prepared to meetings and participate in the discussion? These are all things that are somewhat subjective and can be very hard to measure. Alan, do you have an example that can help us illustrate this?
Sure. I happen to have one right here. So if you think about two employees, Joe and Rosa, and they're working together on a project about working remotely. Rosa is the project lead and Joe is helping her. Rosa is not Joe's supervisor. For the webinar here, imagine that you are Joe's supervisor. Joe's job was to produce a draft document explaining a new procedure that's been developed for working remotely. He submitted it to Rosa and she asked Joe for a lot more detail. Joe feels that what he has given her is good enough and that more detail is not going to provide any value. When he tells her that, she acknowledges that they have a difference of opinion, but based on past experience, she really needs Joe to provide more details. Joe gets very angry, blows up, and abruptly exits the Zoom conference. Now stop and take a minute and imagine that scene as if you had been on the call as an observer. Jot down some behaviors Joe may have exhibited. Enter a few of these in the chat box. I'll give you a minute to just make a couple notes, and if some people want to take a shot and put them in the chat box. What were some behaviors that you would have observed Joe engaging in? Okay, we have one person says unprofessional conduct. Certainly was unprofessional. Impatience. Okay. A few more seconds. Here we go. All right. So not being objective, frustration, a couple of people with frustration. I do not see the pool. I'm not sure what that means. Frustration, sarcasm, frustration, felt work wasn't good enough. Oh, do not see the poll, maybe. Sorry. If the poll is blocking your chat box, by the way, you can close the poll. There's an X in the upper right corner. Or click on chat, and that should bring it back forward. So frustration, sarcasm, felt work wasn't good enough, loss of temper, poor emotional management, inflexible, raised voice. It's not a poll question. We're just asking people to chat in. Thank you for that clarification. Misunderstanding the purpose of expectations, not a team player, and acting without emotional intelligence, and erratic. Okay, we'll stop there. It's a great list. A lot of different kinds of input. For many of the things you're talking about there are kind of internal states that Joe has, such as being frustrated and poor emotional management, inflexible, erratic. These are qualities of acting without emotional intelligence. These are all qualities that Joe has, or feelings that he has, and they're internal states. And while you're probably right, and those are probably accurate, we're making an interpretation to come to that. And what we really want to focus on here today is the behavior. And in that list, there's some things were very specific and behavioral. Let's see. Loss of temper, raised voice. Those are real specific statements of actions that he was doing. Others, not a team player, acting without emotional intelligence, again, are kind of describing his internal states. Okay, so let's look at some other examples on the next slide of some. These are, again, feelings, personal traits, internal states of mind, and some of you had some of these, and while they may be accurate, they're open to interpretation, and people can see things differently. And the other thing we want to talk about, again, is performance, which is action, not necessarily how they feel or what they think. So you know what you mean when you're describing what it means to be a team player, for example, but Joe may have a very different interpretation of that. So we want to move from these broad general statements to more specific, measurable, and behavioral statements. So here are four descriptions we might use to describe what Joe did. take a minute and think about which ones are specific and measurable, behaviors that everybody would see pretty much the same way, and which are a little bit more vague and subject to interpretation. Taking the first one, not cooperative, that's really an internal state of mind. He's acting in a way that we believe he's feeling uncooperative, and we think he's being uncooperative. But what he's really doing is, for example, not summarizing what he hears, raising his voice, speaking harshly, exiting the conference early. Those were all actions he did, and those are behaviors. Those behaviors make us think he's uncooperative, but what we know for sure are the behaviors I just described. So can you see the value of sticking more to really specific behavior rather than the general statements like uncooperative? The last item, rude, could be a behavior, but again, it's a little bit vague. It's not real specific. How do we know he's rude? Well, because he raised his voice, because he exited the call. So again, those behavioral descriptions are more helpful than saying you're rude. Also, when you tell someone they're not cooperative and they're not rude, and they're rude, you're talking about them personally and the kind of person they are. And that is more offensive than saying you raised your voice, you yelled at me, you used harsh language, you left early. Those are behaviors, and while they're still not easy to hear, they're less harsh on a person than cooperative and rude might be. Okay, and here's another example. On the left, you see a number of internal states or feelings, and this is where we all start. You always start with this. This is what comes to mind, and that's fine. And then you say, well, how do I know he was feeling angry or had a bad attitude? Well, I saw him interrupting. He made negative comments. He had an angry tone. So on the right-hand side are more behaviors that are more explicit, harder for Joe to argue with. He has to pretty much accept that he did those things, whereas the ones on the left, he could argue possibly whether he did or didn't. So if we stay with the statements on the right, we're on much stronger ground, and our concerns are much more clear to the other person. So we've spent a good bit of time on this, and we're going to get into it even a little bit more. It's not as easy as it looks to be this specific, and it really pays dividends for you in how you manage performance. So I hope this is clear, but again, if you have questions either now or as we go along, please feel free to put them in the chat box, and we'll try to answer them either as we go or at the end. So Jenny's going to take us through the next topic, which is how you create these specific and behavioral performance expectations. They're the key for effectively managing performance, especially when working remotely.
Thanks, Alan. Let's talk about the two parts of behavioral performance expectations. The first is the task to be done, and the second is the quality standard to which it is to be done. The task is a very simple statement of a verb and its object, or a verb and a noun. Let's look at these examples of job tasks. Register a new client, write a grant, document an incident, and so on. They're all verb and a noun. If we think back to Joe and Rosa, the tasks Joe had were to assist Rosa, to listen when she spoke, and to share ideas. Tasks are pretty easy to state and pretty easy to accomplish if we just leave it at that. But Joe did assist Rosa. He just didn't do it in the way she wanted. He listened to her, but he wasn't very collaborative or effective when he did so. And he did share his ideas, but again, he didn't do it very collaboratively or effectively. In order to get performance expectations that we want, we need to be specific. We need to spend some time clearly stating the quality standards we expect the employee to meet when completing a task. So now I want you to spend a few seconds thinking about the task for your own job. Write a few down that come quickly to mind. Just on a paper in front of you. You don't have to use the chat box for this. Now let's think a little bit about the quality standards for those same tasks. The quality standard is how we want the task to be accomplished. If you are Joe and these are your quality standards, it's clear that when we say we want you to assist Rosa, we expect you to ask questions so you fully understand what assistance she needs, and then we want you to provide the assistance she requested. When listening to her before responding, the standard is for you to reflect back to Rosa what you heard her say to make sure you heard it right. And then we want you to share your ideas, but we want you to do it in a way where you facilitate problem solving and are building on Rosa's ideas instead of arguing and countering her ideas. So look at the list of tasks that you just wrote down for your own job. Take one or two and write down the quality standard that would go with the task or the tasks. Hopefully now you see how to create specific and measurable performance expectations that consist of a task and a quality standard. And so now we've completed the S in SMART and we've completed the M in SMART. And we're going to now take a look at the other three letters just briefly. The A stands for agreed upon. It's important that both the employees and the supervisor interpret the standards in the same way. This doesn't necessarily mean that performance standards are a negotiation. Think of it instead as a clarification of what the supervisor specifically means. Because until there's clear agreement on the interpretation of the performance standard, it's unproductive for an employee to try and meet that expectation, because it just might not be what the supervisor wants. In this example, you can see that accurate means either 0 errors, all fields are complete and all the paperwork is attached, or it means there's no more than one error per day. Both the employee and the supervisor agree that this is what they mean when they talk about accurate. When we're working remotely, agreed upon should also incorporate how the employee will report back to the supervisor on the performance standard itself. As we said at the beginning, one of the difficulties of accountability during this time of remote work is that it's hard to see the work being done. So the staff member and the supervisor should agree upon reporting mechanisms. Next, let's look at the R and realistic. Performance expectations should not be unachievable goals. They should be set at a realistic level for a skilled employee in that position. A new employee might not meet all the expectations until they fully learn the job, because they're not necessarily a skilled employee when they first start. So it's fine to provide a learning curve and to let that new employee know that the learning curve is there. But it's also important that the employee knows exactly what will eventually be expected of them. In this remote environment, we might need to take a step back and re-examine expectations that may have once been realistic. And then ask ourselves the question, are these old expectations still realistic in this new environment? In many cases, they may not be. It's an important adjustment to make to try and develop a new set of expectations that are realistic in this remote environment. And some staff do have more new challenges in their work environment than others, and this too can impact what's realistic for those employees. And as many of you said at the beginning, that is one of the harder things to do, is try and fairly set performance expectations based on different work environments for different staff members in their homes. The other thing you may want to think about is talking with your funders and other stakeholders to try and redefine what is realistic and reasonable to accomplish under your grants. From there, it'll be easier for you to revise expectations for your staff if you know what the expectations are for the people who are funding you. Since we do still want expectations to be agreed upon, it's best to do this revision process collaboratively, especially with your experienced staff, instead of imposing it from above. But it's also important that you feel good about the expectations that you're setting and that they're realistic and will help you achieve the outcomes and expectations that you're being held to. And finally, we get to T, which is time-bound. Time-bound encompasses how long work should take, how frequently things should be done, and what the deadlines might be. You might have an expectation about how quickly a phone call needs to be returned. You might have an expectation about how long an intake assessment might take, or one about how soon after the end of the month reports must be filed. And again, this is another place to reevaluate if the time-bound expectations might be different in this remote environment than they were when people were working in an office. Remember, though, that time-bound is still an important part of a SMART performance expectation, so I'm not suggesting that you drop time-bound as a quality standard. Instead, I'm suggesting that you have discussions with your staff and work together to come up with timeframes that make sense and also get the job done. So that's a summary of what a SMART expectation looks like: specific, measurable, agreed upon, realistic, and time-bound. Right now, I'm going to take a couple seconds, 20 or 30 seconds, to pause so that if anyone has any questions at this point about SMART or about performance expectations, you can write them in the chat box. We are going to keep moving forward after the slide, but we will try and answer those questions at the end of the webinar, and we might be able to answer them sooner. But it is important to consider how the world has changed in this remote environment and how that might redefine what you expect from your employees. we do need to rethink what success means. All right. Thank you for the questions that have been submitted.
Okay, so we hope you see the benefits of using specific and measurable performance expectations. In fact, again, as people said, during this time of change, it's hard to decide what's fair, what's right. And so the exercise of actually going through and looking at your expectations, talking with your staff, and reflecting the new reality could be a great way to begin to bring people together around what is our new normal. And in a lot of the coaching sessions I've talked with people about, we're really past the crisis stage. Crisis is a time of great change. We're kind of into this is the new normal. It's going to be with us for quite a while. And so let's take some time to solidify and talk about what our expectations are. What's a reasonable balance? How do people handle family work balance in a situation where family and work are all in the same room at the same time? And so having that conversation with each of your staff can be a very, very helpful tool for helping people move forward in a way that feels fair to everybody and gets the job done, which is your job as the supervisor. In addition to holding people accountable, these expectations can also motivate employees by giving them increased clarity of what it is that they're supposed to do. And this, in turn, reduces anxiety that people have, especially now that they're not really sure what's expected of them. And that slows people down, makes them less effective and less efficient. And that gives them confidence in going forward and knowing where they want to go. Measurable expectations also make it easier for supervisors to give helpful corrective feedback. It's so much easier when you have something objective and measurable to base your feedback on. Focusing your feedback on expectations and employee behavior helps reduce employee defensiveness and points them in the direction we want them to go. Again, it's more defensive producing to say you're rude rather than your voice was harsh. Slight difference, but makes a big difference. In addition, by focusing on the end result, you empower your employees to figure out how they want to organize their work in order to achieve the expectations that you set. It also helps limit micromanagement. You don't have to direct employees every step of the way in order to manage their performance. With skilled employees, just let them know where you need them to end up, and then get out of their way while they get the work done. Now that you know how to develop smart expectations, let's take a look at how you can put them to use when giving corrective feedback. Corrective feedback is challenging to share in the best of times. Giving it while working remotely and while your staff are under added stress makes it even more difficult. But by setting clear expectations, your feedback will be much easier to deliver and more effective. The first step in giving effective feedback is to state your expectation. If you've developed it in behavioral terms, then it becomes easy to identify the problem behavior. It's the part of the expectation that's not being met. And that's the first half of your feedback. State the expectation and what behavior isn't happening. It's pretty simple if you've done the hard work of creating a smart expectation. Second part of your feedback statement describes why it's important that the expectation isn't being met. Or in other words, what's the impact of the employee's poor behavior? Again, if you've carefully crafted the expectations and shared these with the employee in advance, this should be obvious. And in some cases, you may not even need to state the impact again. But in any event, that's all there is to corrective feedback. Restate the expectation, identify the behavior that needs to change and why it matters, and then stop talking. At this point, the employee is ready to respond, usually defensively, and your job changes to listening. You listen first to diffuse their defensiveness. You want to reassure them that you're giving this feedback to help them improve their performance, not to punish or chastise them. The best way to prove your good intentions is by listening quietly, repeating back a summary of what you hear, agreeing with what you can, and then stating your intention that you'd like to work with them to help them strengthen their performance and fully meet the expectation. So far, so good? You've prepared ahead and presented your feedback, and then you switch to listening. The last part of correcting poor performance is problem solving. As you listen carefully for anything the employee says that may shine a light on a solution. The key is while the expectations come from you, the solution needs to come from the employee. So again, your role is fairly simple. You facilitate problem solving by asking the employee what they can do differently to stop the problem behavior and meet the expectations. You can ask them what you can do to help, but the onus should be on them to make the change. If they ask you for things you can't or won't do, pause and consider what they're asking for before you say no. There may be a little something you'd be happy to do that meets them part way. But if nothing comes to mind, I'd suggest you tell them you're going to take some time to think about their request and ask them to continue to think about solutions. Agree to meet again in a day or two to continue the conversation. When doing this remotely, it's important to be patient and not push too hard or too fast. You do want to hold firm to the expectation you set, but you want to be flexible about the employee's ideas for what they will do differently to better meet the expectation. Managing performance is about helping employees meet expectations. Let's go back to Joe and Rosa and see what kind of feedback we can give Joe. Our expectation was that Joe would take time to listen and understand Rosa's perspective, and he would share his ideas in a way that facilitated problem solving. Instead, what happened was when Joe was talking to Rosa, his behavior led to conflict and not collaboration. Here's how it might sound when you deliver the whole message.
Joe, I want to talk to you a little bit about how you spoke with Rosa just now on that Zoom call. My expectation is that when you're speaking with any colleague, you take the time to listen to everything that they have to say so you can understand the point they're making. If you disagree, then share ideas and brainstorm with them so that you can help solve the problem. When you were speaking with Rosa on the call, though, your tone of voice sounded negative and harsh, and instead of sharing ideas with her and collaborating, you argued with her. As a result, Rosa walked away from that conversation feeling attacked and unsupported, and the project is now delayed because you didn't come to an agreement on how we're going to proceed.
Thanks, Jenny. That was a great example. Once you're back in the office, be sure to always deliver this kind of feedback in person. Until then, use a video chat service to deliver the feedback. If that's not possible, a phone call is minimally acceptable alternative. On a phone call, you lose the body language that's so essential to effective communication. Some researchers have estimated that body language represents 50% of the efficacy of communication. Another 40% of the clarity comes from vocalizations, tone of voice, volume, pitch, etc. So a phone call at least picks up that part. But note that texting or email lose 90% of the key elements of effective communication, so never give corrective feedback in writing. You can follow up a verbal conversation with a written summary if you think that's necessary, but never give the initial feedback in writing. Hopefully, as you listen to Jenny deliver the feedback, you heard that those are fairly objective statements. Jenny didn't have to bring in her subjective opinions, and while Joe may not like to hear this, it would be hard for him to argue with it. And then what do you do after you give the feedback? Jenny, how would you talk to Joe after that?
Well, so Joe would probably be defensive, so I'd give him a little bit of time to respond. He might deny or argue with my observations, and I won't argue back. In fact, I'll probably paraphrase his statement so that that'll help him feel heard and feel like I'm supporting him. My goal here is to change his behavior. I don't want to scold him. Once he's finished, I'll let him know that both he and Rosa had a role in the conflict, and I'm not blaming him. What I'm doing is pointing out some of his behaviors that didn't meet expectations, and then I'll ask him what he might have been able to do differently in that situation to come to a better outcome. So once we've sorted that out in a hypothetical replay, I'll ask him what he can do now to try and rebuild the bridge with Rosa and find a way to get her what she needs in a way that he can support so that the whole project can move forward.
Okay, so this addresses corrective feedback, which I know is a big challenge for many people, and hopefully we've given you some good tips and an example to follow. But I hope you can see that having smart expectations is really the key to doing this effectively. And smart expectations also make positive feedback a lot more powerful and effective as a motivator. Here's a situation where Kathy, one of your more experienced caseworkers, has agreed to help mentor a new caseworker, Laverne. Laverne was just hired as the shutdown began. She had limited prior experience and has only met the staff via Zoom meetings. You could have said to Kathy, "Hey, thanks for helping Laverne," which, while it was nice to hear, doesn't have much of a motivational push to it. Instead, if you bring in more specifics, including exactly what behaviors Kathy used and what impact it had on Laverne, Kathy is likely to have an even more positive reaction. Jenny, can you show us how this one may sound?
Sure. Hey, Kathy, thanks so much for helping Laverne. She told me you regularly check in with her and you take time to listen to her concerns, and instead of telling her what to do, you help her think through what she needs to do. This could have been a really rough transition for her with us working remotely, but now she feels supported, she feels respected, and she really is part of a team. Her performance is improving, and your actions have helped us serve our clients even better. Great job.
Thanks, Jenny. That takes about 24 seconds longer than a simple thank you, but it's well worth the effort. So let's sum up what we've covered so far. If you take the time to be clear and specific with your performance expectations, it becomes easier to hold staff accountable and thereby manage their performance. Your assessment of their performance also becomes simpler. Either they did or did not meet the expectations. It's a yes or no assessment. Also, with these SMART expectations, your feedback, both positive and corrective, becomes more powerful and easier to deliver. You have an objective basis for making your assessment. And when you include the expectations in your feedback, you reinforce the performance you're looking for. So this wraps up our presentation, but before you leave, I want to remind you of a couple of things. Number one, stay on the line if you have any questions. Please type them in the chat box, and we'll stay and answer all the questions that come in. If you do need to leave, please complete the evaluation that will pop up on your screen. We value your feedback, and this is a great chance to practice. What expectations did you have for us, for our performance? And then how did we do? Give us some feedback. And then as this slide shows, we're still available for a wide range of training and technical assistance, including customized training for your staff, consulting on a wide range of leadership topics, and individual and group coaching. If you'd like to explore further the information we presented in this or other webinars, or have other leadership challenges we can assist with. Training and coaching, as Blake said, is available at no charge to you or your agency. So feel free to email us if you have any questions about our services or any questions about the webinar as well. But for now, if you could type them in the chat box, we'll take a few minutes to do that, and then we'll respond to them right now. But before we get to the questions, I just want to turn it over to Blake to wrap things up for us.
Thank you, Alan. I appreciate it. We usually have a few participants who take off or are up against the time and they have other obligations, so we want to give everybody a chance to do that. And while that happens, I just want to thank Jenny and Alan for putting together today's webinar and reiterate to please use that evaluation for us. Take just a couple minutes and type a couple responses to those questions. That is super helpful, and it really does improve each webinar we offer. In fact, it improves all of our trainings that we offer. Like Alan said too, he said that the TARP program is, and those resources, including the coaching options, are of no cost to you guys. I want to reiterate that that is free. It is absolutely free. There is plenty of availability between our training technical assistance request program and those coaching sessions for you guys to take advantage of those opportunities that are available to you now. So please, please, please take advantage of them while they're there. So if you have to take off, we appreciate it. Thank you for joining us. If not, stick around. We're going to go through some of these questions as a group here and answer as many as we can.
Thanks, Blake. And we did already have some, there were 3 or 4 questions that came in when we paused at the end of SMART. So we can maybe start with those. And 2 of them may go a little bit together. One is, how do you initiate the conversation around setting performance expectations? And the other is, how do you incorporate SMART into supervision meetings or into the agenda for your supervision meetings? And I can start, and then Alan, if you want to continue. So first is, if you haven't talked about performance expectations in the past, it may be, it's a conversation that you may want to have. Sometimes people do it around the annual review process. It's certainly, if you have a new employee coming on, it's the best time to start talking about expectations from the beginning. But it may be something that you can talk about in an upcoming supervision meeting by saying, listen, I just got off this webinar. I took a webinar last week that talked about supervision. You don't have to say it's necessarily specifically about performance of supervision, and I want to try, being clear, setting some clear and measurable performance expectations, especially since we're in this new environment, so we all know where we stand. Because it will, if it is a new concept for people, it may take some time. And as we talked about, it's important when you do initiate the conversation that it is a two-way conversation. you do want to set the expectations that you think are important for the position, but it is something that you want to get feedback from the staff member that you're supervising to get so that you can agree upon what those performance standards are, so that everybody, so that's the A in SMART, making sure you've agreed upon them. And then once you've had them set, the way you can incorporate them into your supervision meetings is it's not necessarily something that at every supervision meeting you need to review performance expectations on the list. It's something that maybe comes up a little less frequently, once every 6 months or on the annual review, except for when you feel like there's time to give feedback because somebody is not meeting performance expectations. And then it gives you a place to start with that corrective or constructive feedback on, this is the performance standard that we agreed on. This is the expectation that we have for this piece of your job, and I feel like you're not meeting that performance expectation, and this is why, and here's the impact of you're not meeting that expectation. Alan, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I agree. Corrective feedback is always hard, and as Jenny just said, this makes it easier. It's a lot of work to create the SMART expectation. We don't want to minimize that. So don't try to do it all in at once, but over time with your more experienced staff to take time and talk about, so what it is that we do, what it is that you do, what looks good, what makes a good job in whatever your job is, here's your task, what's a good way of doing that, what are some words we can use that are observable and measurable. It takes time to play with that and come out with it. And then once it's in place, though, it's you refer to it over and over again as you need to, certainly on the annual evaluation, but in any supervision meeting where there is a problem, an issue that you want to bring up, you've got your that's your template, is the expectation. And also, as I said, it's also a great way to give positive feedback that's much more powerful. If you read the expectation, you basically read it back to them. We expect you to do A, B, C, and D, and you're doing it all. You're doing it great, and it's so helpful because our clients are feeling so much more positive, or our agency is moving better, our team is working better. So again, what's the impact of their good behavior? But that expectation, if they're doing well, just read it back to them, and it's much more powerful than, hey, you're doing a great job. And there's a question of how do we do it with employees not used to it? How do we set this up? And it has to be a conversation. It's always good to blame the instructor. So you say, hey, I went to this webinar and these guys said that we should think about SMART, and I think it's a good idea, so we're going to try it. But again, you're not doing it to catch them or to set them up or to hold them accountable. You're doing it to clarify communication, and the current state of uncertainty is a great excuse for doing it. Things are so up in the air. We don't really know exactly what we're supposed to be doing. Let's take some time and really try to frame it out. Let's try to use this model of being behavioral. What are the behaviors that staff have to do now that's different than what you did before? What are the expectations I might hold of you that need to be different, given that, maybe you're not going to work 9 to 5. Maybe you need to work from 6 in the morning to 9 in the morning when it's quiet, and then you need a few hours break to help your kids with school, and then you're going to come back. So our expectation of time may be different. So it's a great time to have the conversation. I think it sets you up nicely that you're not coming in as some kind of dictator, but you're having the conversation. The key is with agreed upon is that you have to feel good about it. You have to feel that it's enough. You can't, it's not a negotiation where you meet them halfway. If you don't think it's right, you want to hold the line, but you want to have that conversation, and the agreed upon is more that they understand what you're looking for. But you want their input, you want to work collaboratively. Bottom line, though, you're the supervisor. You need to draw the line where you think it needs to be, again, with conversation, with some flexibility given the new environment. But bottom line, it should be a productive place where you end up.
Right, and I think your point, Alan, that this, one way to initiate a conversation, if you haven't done it before, is if there are areas that clearly you maybe don't have agreement right now. So you both, the expectation is that you're going to be flexible about time right now, but you may sense that what you considered you being flexible about time is not the same thing that your staff member is. And so making sure then you can start that conversation. Hey, I think we have a different expectation on what's happening here. So let's talk about it. What my expectation is maybe that I'm flexible. We're flexible about time, but my expectation is that you're still spending 8 hours or doing something else. So I think that's a way to initiate the conversation. Oh, yeah, nice. You started the video again. That's good.
Another question was how to handle resistant staff who constantly resist any work measurement while others don't resist. And then somebody else said, do you have advice when staff seem to have a bad attitude, not motivated, not talkative or expressive? These seem like character traits to me, but I have a hard time giving feedback. I don't want to say you have a bad attitude or don't seem engaged in your job. What can I say? So both of these talk about work measurement, and let's take the second one first. If you have you see someone with a bad attitude, not motivated, not expressive, not engaged, stop and think. That is the first place. We always start with that, which is not where we want to end up, but it is where we start. We see their feelings, we think we see their feelings, their attitude, their character traits. And so step back. Well, how do I know? What makes me say they're being uncooperative or they're resistant or they're not engaged? What do I see? I see that they're not making the phone calls. They're not participating in staff meeting. Clearly, their attention is elsewhere. I see them texting during the staff meeting. With Zoom, we can see a lot of things. And so what's the behavior? Or when people ask you a question, you don't respond, or you roll your eyes. Nonverbal behavior is behavior. So someone's facial expressions are things you can observe, and you can feed that back to the person. So I see resistance because I see you, not answering questions, not participating, not helping. When people ask you for advice, you don't give anything. You've talked rudely to your coworkers. Your stats are down. You said we asked you to make 25 contacts and you've made 5. Other people have made 25, and I know you may have different challenges. What can you do to get yourself up to 25? So again, it's take your first impression, the feeling, the attitude, the character trait, and then think about the behavior, and it'll come quickly to you. What are you seeing them do that others are not doing that you find are problematic or not helpful? And so for the person who's resistant to work measurement, conversation with them about, again, really specific, concrete numbers and you all have numbers you need to report to OVS, and if your staff are producing those, you were supposed to make 17 client contacts, you only made 4. I understand, you've got a challenging situation right now, or maybe you're uncomfortable doing it by the phone, you're used to doing it in person, or maybe this wasn't your job and your job no longer can be done. So we've added you to making phone calls, and this may be a difficult, let's take some time, let's role play, let's talk about it. Ask them, what do you think? What would be fair? I want 25, you're doing 5. What's a fair number? And we're not going to split the difference, but you want to hear from them. Well, I could do 12. I'll tell you what, let's do 12 this week, see how that goes. I want you to get to 25, but I'm willing to work with you. So let's try 12. That's a big increase from 5. And let's chat at the end of the week and see how that went and what we can do to get you even higher. So again, you're holding the expectation clear, but you're working with them collaboratively and supportively to get them where they need to go, not punitively. So hopefully all that helps. Jenny, anything you want to add to those?
Well, I mean, I think there are people that may be resistant to any type of measurement like that. And so part of that is a balance between setting your expectation and giving that feedback, which is, at some point, I understand that you don't like to be measured, but it is my expectation, and part of my job and the expectation of my supervisor that I get certain things accomplished. So that, it may be part of the job that even if you resist, even if you don't like to be measured, you don't like that sort of measurement from a supervisor, it may be part of the job. And that's where it becomes not a negotiation. You as a supervisor need to be comfortable. And so even if that staff person is resisting the idea of maybe a smart performance expectation, that may be part of what their job entails, is having those smart expectations. Just like a lot of us are resistant to a lot of paperwork, but it is part of our job. And in order to have that, in order to have that position, there's going to be some pieces of it that you may not like as much, but you're still going to have to go forward with.
Okay, we have another question here of how do you deal with more mature staff who are struggling with the technology for remote working, resistant to the work, making all sorts of excuses for not achieving any decent work expectations, blaming it on technology, and not being open to younger, more tech-savvy staff who attempt to assist them? So I can have gray beard here. I can relate to that the challenge as technology gets more and more complex. It is harder to keep up. So there's a couple of issues that, again, what might be going on internally. It could be pride, it could be resentment, it could be feeling disrespected. So you want to be thoughtful and listen for what their resistance is. Your conversation to them is about performance, and say, look, we're in a remote situation. To get the job done, we have to change the way we've been doing it. We've provided this technology to you. I see that you're not making use of it. Let's talk about what's getting in the way, what's stopping you from using it. And then again, they might give you all kinds of excuses. Well, I don't like it. It doesn't work. It crashes all the time. I don't have the up-to-date system, blah, 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 blah. And you just acknowledge all those excuses. Yes, all that could be true. Yes, it is difficult. It is frustrating. It can be disruptive. And we still need to do it. Again, don't use the word but there. So you want to acknowledge all their excuses and then use the word and we still need to make it work somehow. So how can I help you? How can we make this work? And it's kind of like a broken record. You just calmly listen to all their protestations and then you just come back to, yep, and we still need to make it work. What can we do? Eventually they're going to see they're not wearing you down, and hopefully they will come up with a solution. If they don't, say, well, I just can't do it. It doesn't work. Say, well, look, we've got some people who are much more comfortable with the technology. Was there one of them that you think you might want to work with who could help you? We could have them, sit in on a call or two. They can, Zoom with you, or they can just have a conversation, do a role play, do some demos. Ask them to choose who the partner is. They don't want a young upstart who they feel maybe is disrespectful. And some young people are somewhat disrespectful of us old folks that, you grew up with it. You're a native to the land, and we're immigrants. We're newcomers to this land. And it's harder for us to do it. So there are, some people that aren't a good chemistry mix, and you want to be thoughtful about that. Bottom line, your expectation, they will learn to use the technology. There is no choice. And you just keep coming back to that. This is what has to happen. But you do it in a patient way and the supportive way, but keep coming back to your bottom line. Jenny, anything on that?
No, I think that's a great answer. I want to get there a couple more questions, and I know we're running out of time. One is that I think is an important one, and I don't know that Alan and I have the answers, but it's a question, is it all right to have different expectations for different staff based on their situations at home during the crisis? And to some degree, this is a conversation, and it will continue to be a conversation as I think as people move part-time or going back to work, and that it's a conversation first that you need to have within your agency and your leadership, which is, can we hold different people to different performance expectations in the same job based on the home situation? Because I think that's one that we are struggling with now, and we will continue to struggle with. But it's something that you need to think about. You may want to be flexible about how people, I think Alan talked about it earlier, I talked about it earlier as well, that you may want to be flexible about how people accomplish your expectation. So that the expectation is a certain amount of work is going to get done, but you can maybe be flexible with different people on what that looks like based on their home situations. But I think but whether or not you can treat staff differently based on what's going on at home, I think is something that you need to have a conversation with at your leadership level. Alan, thoughts?
Yeah, the other thing, again, this come up in our coaching session, and the last webinar we did was on building your team. And if you have a team that is feeling good about each other and supports each other and works together, they're very willing to understand that certain people have young kids at home, certain people have very sick family members, and certain people have more energy and more availability. And so during this time, the people who can do more, and the people who can't do less, and the team adjusts and covers that. If you don't have a strong team, then it's a very difficult situation. And again, you need guidance from your administration of what you can do and how much you can adjust. I think it's critical. We will come back from this. We will come back to the office. And it's critical in thinking about coming back. How do we treat our people during this time? And if we have to be humane, we have to be accept people's reality is not what they need. It may be that your agency says that they have to charge time because they're only working half-time and not full-time. That may be a solution. It may be that your team will step up and nobody needs to be singled out. But again, I would encourage you to think about building your team if you're not having that kind of collaboration right now. Go back, take a look at our webinar, give us a call. We'd be happy to talk to you more about it. But team building remotely is really challenging, very difficult. It can be done, and people are coming up with great ideas and great techniques for doing that. And so that's, I guess it's a complicated situation. As Jenny said, there's not one answer, but those are some of our thoughts.
And there's one more question, I think, and then it's easy to say to someone that behavior would not have been acceptable if we were all working together in the office. So I want to remind you that it's still not acceptable while we're working remotely. Is that okay to say to a remote employee? And I would say yes. That if you take a step back and you look at the expectation, and that hasn't changed, we've encouraged you to look at it. But if the expectation hasn't changed from when you were in the office, I think it's okay to say this is still the expectation, that whatever it is, that and it's not, and that expectation hasn't changed. Would you agree, Alan?
Yep. Yeah. No. Exactly right. Yep.
I think those are all the questions. Any other ones up there?
Nope, that's all I've seen. So.
Yeah. All right, terrific.
We'll take last call if anybody wants to type in a question real quick, but we are just about out of time, so we'll be wrapping it up.
Yeah, it takes us about sorry, Alan. Just wanted to let everybody know it takes us about a day to get the webinar recording uploaded to our webpage. So check back tomorrow. We also send out whoever attended. We send an email to everybody with the link to it as well. So stay tuned for us.
We do want to thank everybody who has been part of this webinar, and as well as those of you who have come back for the many webinars that we've done over the past few weeks. It's been great to see so many of you on the webinars.
Yeah, I don't see.
And people have asked previously. We had about, I think, 150 people or so on this one, and we've had large numbers like that on all of them. So.
It's been really great.
Yeah, kudos to you guys.
If there are topics that you are interested in both a webinar or in a training, feel free to email me or email Alan or even email Blake to let us know. We don't have any kind of on the docket right now, but we will be looking at other topics and things we're going to be doing over the next few months. So if you think that there's something specific that you're thinking about, we'd love to hear about it.
Okay, so seeing no other questions, thank you again for your participation and your interest, and we look forward to connecting with you in the future.
All righty.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.